This is Arise, the world's standout news channel. I am Adeniyi'S Osakwe. Welcome to Newsday. So earlier today in Algiers, day 2 of the 4th Intra-African Trade Fair, IATF 2025, got underway, and today's sessions are all centered on transforming Africa's trade from within through stronger value chains, through bold export strategies and new investments. Delegates also explored the AfCFTA's progress, local beneficiation, and really positioning African exporters globally. So with the $3.5 trillion market connecting 1.4 billion people, IATF 2025 continues to drive Africa's leading trade agenda.
Will set the stage for a very dynamic panel of trailblazing voices, all committed to one mission: positioning African exporters at the forefront of global trade. So, please welcome to the podium the Comptroller General of Nigeria and the Chairperson of the World Customs Organization, Mr. Bashir Adeniyi.
Thank you very much, Mark, for the generous introduction. Trade is about negotiations. I have 5 minutes to do this. I'm going to negotiate an additional 2 minutes. So pardon me. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, panelists, I must start by first acknowledging the warm welcome and the hospitality which us, the Algerian authorities, have availed us since our arrival the day before yesterday. Thank you so very much, and our colleagues have managed to put up a very big show. It's been a very big spectacle, and as a stakeholder in Nigeria, I can only promise you that as Algiers was big, Lagos would be even bigger. Yesterday, the Presidential Roundtable kicked off the conference, and we had an insight into some of the major challenges bedefiling trade, intra-African trade in Africa. A number of challenges were identified by the Presidential Roundtable. The challenge of inadequate infrastructure, limited market access, fragmented payment system, infrastructural deficit, trust deficit, and all. These challenges really expose fundamental weaknesses in our system that require coordinated action of all stakeholders. Added to this is the emerging global challenges of tariff wars and protectionist policies. This was alluded to by the SG in the chart that we just had. And together with all of this, we'll see a very compelling case for Africa to accelerate its internal integration as both defensive strategy and a growth catalyst. However, it must be stated that we are not just passive observers of these challenges. We are beginning to observe active and commendable efforts to dismantle some of these issues that have been raised. And on this note, we must start by acknowledging and commending AfCFTA Bank for the groundbreaking Pan-African Payment Settlement System, PASS, which was launched a couple of years ago to revolutionize intra-African payments. This system, as we're made to understand, is facilitating instant cross-border transactions in local currencies, potentially saving Africa $5 billion annually in transaction costs. PAPS now connects central banks across multiple regions, with 25 major commercial banks already integrated. Similarly, I must also applaud the organizers of the recent Wade Fund launch in Abuja, Nigeria, which specifically targets women-led businesses for export development. Our experience in Nigeria Customs confirms that when systemic barriers are removed and targeted support provided, women-owned businesses don't just participate in export markets, they often exceed expectations, bringing innovative approaches that benefit the entire supply chains. These are some of the notable initiatives aimed at transforming the current reality, where Africa's 1.4 billion people, 17% of the global population, contributes only 3% to world trade, with intra-African trade representing only 15% of our total trade, compared to 60% in Europe, 50% in Asia. The AfCFTA, as the world's trade compared to, which is the largest free trade area since the WTO, combined with innovation like PAPs, creates unprecedented opportunities for repositioning African exporters globally. As the chairperson of the World Customs Organization, representing 186 customs administrations and processing 98% of global trade, I can confirm that African customs modernization is accelerating rapidly. Through the EU WCO programs, most African countries have adopted the Harmonized System 2022. We have trained over 4,300 trade practitioners across the continent, and we have certified 40 master's trainers spreading trade facilitation knowledge from Cairo to Cape Town. And moreover, there has been a strategic level commitment by the WCO and the AfCFTA Secretariat through the Memorandum of Understanding signed in 2022, which was aimed at harmonizing customs procedures that directly support continental trade integration. All of this put together, these initiatives are commendable and provide hope that efforts are being made to ameliorate some of these structural bottlenecks that we have mentioned, which we face when we conduct trade within the continent. Needless to say, we need to do more to lessen those challenges within the short to medium term to rapidly increase the flow of trade within the continent. And from a gatekeeper perspective, with first-hand observations of flows around our borders, permit me to highlight 6 strategic moves that will be beneficial to position African exporters at the forefront. The first is that at this stage, we must seek to simplify our procedures in order to amplify the volume. Complex processes kill export's dream. Streamlining export procedures is important so that what used to take weeks can now take days, and what takes days can take some few hours. We need to create green channels for trusted exporters to reduce processing time so that products shouldn't sit at the ports accumulating damages, that they should be moving swiftly to international markets. The second is that we need to build trust network. And this is deriving from some of the things that we heard from the Presidential Roundtable yesterday. Lessons from our authorized economic operator programs implementation in Nigeria highlighted the need to create a continental network of trusted exporters. Our pilot AEO program integrated small and medium-scale enterprises that trade within the continent. Our objective here was to get them to be compliant and understand the benefits of trust. When small companies join this network, they get expedited clearance, reduced inspection, and most importantly, global recognition. Trust is the currency of international trade, and we must make African exporters very rich in trust. The third is the need for us to embrace digital integration for continental reach. The revolution isn't just coming to African trade, it is already here, and we are harnessing it strategically. Through integrated digital platforms and the National Single Window initiatives, we are creating seamless connectivity between exporters and all relevant government agencies. The vision is very simple. An exporter in Kano, northern Nigeria, should be able to clear goods for shipments to Kampala in Uganda using the same digital interface they use for exports to London or some other European countries. This is one tool that the WCO has been promoting and what some countries in the continent are already adopting. And by Q1 2026, in some few months, Nigeria aims to come on board with this tool. The fourth is that technology is a great equalizer. Blockchain, AI, and data analytics all present massive opportunities to scale up businesses and our integration. African exporters equipped with digital tools compete on equal footing with established global players. We need the level playing field and tilt this in our favor of those that are bold enough to embrace it with the use of the right technology. And rapidly, let me mention the last two. First is the youth power represents a major export power. Our demographic dividends is our secret weapons in Africa. Our young, increasingly skilled population brings fresh perspectives and digital native approaches to export markets. Deliberate efforts must be made to build export strategies around youth engagement and create pathways for young entrepreneurs to access global markets with unprecedented ease. And finally, we need to unleash the women's export potentials, recognizing that women exporters often outperform when barriers are removed, creating dedicated pathways and support systems that tap into this proven competitive advantage is a must for us in Africa. It will interest us here to note that customs administrations in the continent understand those strategies, as a good number of us are already implementing relevant initiatives. But too often, they fall short of effectively achieving through continental integration due to some structural reasons. This fragmentation limits our collective impact and slows our progress towards positioning African exports globally. It is in the recognition of this challenge that in Nigeria, we are already advancing preparation with the AfCFTA Secretariat, the AfRexim Bank, and the World Customs Organization Secretariat to convene a roundtable of African heads of customs administration in Abuja, in Nigeria, to chart coordinated solutions, align continental initiatives, and leverage the use of WCO tools and instruments to create seamless trade facilitation across Africa. As we engaged our distinguished panelists this morning, these panelists representing expertise from trade to finance, infrastructure development, policy implementation, and market access, I will challenge all of them to commit to what is necessary, not just to analyze what is possible. African exporters seek partnerships and pathway to global dominance, not sympathy or charity. The story we write today in Algiers, it's about transformation, positioning an entire continent at the forefront of global commerce. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Comptroller General Mr. Bashir Adeniyi of Nigeria, also the chairperson of the World Customs Organization, for setting the scene there for what is going to be a deep dive as we welcome to the stage a powerful panel that will explore how we take our exporters beyond borders and beyond expectations. You can expect bold ideas, practical solutions, and candid insights from world-class voices. Now, this panel is expertly moderated by a journalist whose career has skyrocketed since she won the BBC World Comla d'Humour Award almost a decade ago. Please welcome your moderator, Ms. Didi Akinyelure. Ms. Didi Akinyelure.
Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this 60-minute session themed Positioning African Exporters at the Forefront of Global Trade. My name is Adeniyi, and it's an honor to lead this conversation. Just like to remind you, as we have this session, a few things. Do keep your phones on silent during this session. And please tweet about this panel discussion, and you can do that using the hashtag IATF 2025. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's be honest, Africa's slice of global trade is still way too small, at around 3%. And that's surprising when you think about the incredible resources the continent has. Rich natural assets, tons of fertile land, a fast-growing consumer base, and the youngest population on the planet. But with the African Continental Free Trade Area up and running, we've got a real chance to change that story. This could be the moment Africa steps up, taps into its diversity and creativity, and claims a bigger, bolder role in global trade. Now, of course, there have been challenges: over-reliance on raw exports, not enough local manufacturing, and fragmented markets. But things are shifting. Global supply chains are evolving, investors are paying attention, and there's growing momentum around industrialization, value addition, and tech-driven trade. We've got an incredible lineup of speakers to help us unpack this, and I'd like to welcome them up onto the stage as I encourage them to keep their responses within 5 minutes, as we would like to hear from everybody. We've got Zanele Sani, Chief Director, Export Promotion and Marketing, and she is representing Honorable Kenneth Morolong, for the Deputy Minister in the Presidency and a Member of Parliament. Have we got her here? From the International Trade Center, Executive Director, Dr. Pamela Cook-Hamilton. A round of applause for her as she comes up. Representing the private sector, Mr. Nikhil Gandhi, Executive Director and Chief Business Officer of Arise IIP. A round of applause for him as he walks up. The CEO of ITFC, Engineer Adib Al-Ama. Thank you, sir. And we also have, and if he's here, please come forward, Mr. Khalib Bouchelgam, former executive at the Ministry of Trade and former advisor to the presidency. Is he here? Perfect. And also from Algeria, we have Mr. Shakib Boublenza, Director General of SARO Boublenza. Thank you very much, sir. All right, let's get it started. Translation. Okay. We also need the translation, please. I'll just give a few minutes for all that to get sorted. Translation. Okay. And if we have Zanele Sani here, please join us. We're expecting you. All right, let's get things started. So just as I said, it's a pleasure to have all of you here on our panel. The African Continental Free Trade Area, we know, was designed to unlock Africa's economic potential and open up global market access. I'd like to start with you, Dr. Pamela. The International Trade Center works closely with businesses and governments across Africa. And the AfCFTA has raised a lot of excitement. But the real test is whether African businesses, especially SMEs, can actually take advantage of this. So from what you're seeing, where are the opportunities for SMEs?
Thanks so much. It's really great to be here. I always love attending IATF events because they're so spectacularly done and also so impactful in terms of their reach. ITC has been working quite a lot with SMEs over the years, and in the context of the African continental, in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, it is the single most important decision that African leaders have taken with respect to trade in at least 60 years. And that makes it so critical, therefore, that organizations and businesses especially take advantage of this opportunity. The opportunity that it presents is that if we are able to reduce the tariffs, reduce the non-tariff barriers, ensure that there's movement and integration actually occurs, you will move from a 14% intra-African trade, which is very low, to 40 to 50%. Now, can you imagine how revolutionary that would be in the context of African growth and African investment? The second issue is ensuring that the information is provided. And one of the things that we've been working on is how do we get the information out there? And we've been working, of course, with AfrExim Bank, the AfCFTA Secretariat, and also the AU on creating templates of how to export under the AfCFTA. It is difficult because there's so many SMEs out there, and there are many who don't even know what the AfCFTA is. And so it is trying to work with the business support organizations and other entities to get the information to percolate downwards. Why SMEs are important? Because they are 90% of global trade. And they're responsible for 70% of the world employment. So we can't ignore them. The big companies, yes, they will be able to take care of themselves. But the SMEs are the ones that drive the global economy. And so I think that what's really critical is how do we enable them to utilize this agreement in real terms? How do we help them understand the mechanisms, how to fill out the paperwork, how to look for possible market opportunities? There's one example I'll give. If Côte d'Ivoire, if the tariffs are removed, Côte d'Ivoire can increase its exports by 25% immediately. And this is true for so many countries within Africa. So the AfCFTA can be that mechanism, that single, bold, powerful mechanism that can actually translate Africa's vision for 2063 in real time and immediately. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And still focusing on the opportunities, but bringing in the investor industrial perspective, Mr. Gandhi, you're in the thick of private investment and industrial development. Where do you see the untapped opportunities for Africa to move up the value chain and really compete in global markets?
Thank you for the question, Didi, and thank you, IATF, for having me. This is my second season that I'm attending this forum, and I think initiatives like this are important to grow the inter-Africa trade that we have currently today. And as Dr. Pamela just mentioned, the 16% of inter-Africa trade, if you dive down deeply in that, it's predominantly being done for raw material exports. And I think the real penny drops is when we look at downstream activity increasing, and therefore the value of exports also increasing. If you look at EU, with half the size of population of Africa, they are currently at about 4 trillion worth of inter-EU trade itself. And mind you, none of the raw materials are available in the European markets. So with critical minerals available in Africa, that's the other side of what we are trying to promote. around 30% of world raw material and critical minerals are in Africa. And commodities like cobalt, magnesium are up to about 75 to 80%. But if you look at the world manufacturing output, Africa's manufacturing output stands at 2%. Africa's global trade stands at 2%. And despite having a raw material base in many commodities, especially minerals, agriculture, and many others, we are still at that little small number. So what we are trying to do as the private sector is develop special economic zones and industrial parks on one side and ensure and enable that there are companies within the African continent who can come in and we create ease of doing business. That's one side of what we do. The second part is to educate what is exactly going on and where the opportunities lie. I'll give you an example of what is happening in the cotton sector. Africa is exporting roughly around 18 to $20 billion worth of raw cotton. And it is importing roughly around $45 billion of ready-made garments and fabrics. Now, what it's essentially doing is that it is exporting jobs and creating jobs in other continents where that raw cotton is going. Let me give you another example of cashew. Africa produces 60% of global cashew. Now, that cashew from Cote d'Ivoire, from Tanzania, from Nigeria, travels all the way to China or to Vietnam, gets transformed into a cashew kernel, what we consume, and then gets exported back to Europe, to US. So each cashew kernel that a consumer consumes in Europe or US travels for more than 47,000 miles. And that is exactly what we are doing to transform raw material at the source. And in the last 10 years, what we've been able to do is to develop about 15 industrial zones across 15 countries in Africa. We have now about 500 companies operating in these zones, a total global FDI inflow of about 7 billion. And some examples of what we've done is predominantly looked at sourcing and manufacturing at source. Cashew is one example. We have done the same thing with textile. We now have global brands like H&M, Zara, and many others which are now producing in countries like Benin and Togo. And there are many such examples. I think over 1,800 opportunities of what we've identified for the private sector, whether it's SMEs, MSMEs, to come and participate. And we are there to support, provide data, and enable them to set up their manufacturing in our zones.
Very interesting there. Cotton, cashew, things like cocoa, lithium. Thank you for giving some of those great examples of where value can be added. And we will go deeper into some of those low-hanging fruit during this conversation. But before we do that, I'd like to bring the conversation home to Algeria. Algeria is often described as a bridge between Africa, Europe, and beyond. Mr. Khalid, in your opinion, what role can Algeria play in strengthening Africa's global trade connections?
Bonjour tout le monde. Premièrement, je souhaite la bienvenue à nos invités en Algérie et souhaiter la bienvenue des Algériens à l'AfCFTA 2025. C'est un événement continental qui réunit tous les intervenants dans divers domaines. Et comme l'avaient bien dit ce matin nos collègues, l'Algérie était parmi les premiers négociateurs dans le cadre de l'AfCFTA. Personnellement, j'ai participé à toutes les réunions en étant négociateur en chef dans le cadre de l'AfCFTA. À mon sens, l'AfCFTA constitue beaucoup plus un mini-OMC. C'est une organisation africaine du commerce qui touche aussi bien les marchandises que les services. Et l'Algérie, elle est tout entière avec les opérateurs économiques et les pouvoirs publics dans cette logique d'intégration régionale et économique. Premièrement, il faut dire que l'acte d'exporter, ce n'est que la partie visible de l'iceberg. Ça représente l'aboutissement d'une production, d'une valeur ajoutée, d'une transformation au niveau, aussi bien au niveau national que continental. Et partant de ce principe, l'Algérie a engagé des réformes et engagé également, pas uniquement des lois et réglementations, mais également des choses palpables, notamment l'aboutissement de la route transsaharienne qui relie le nord de l'Afrique, le nord de l'Afrique vers l'Afrique subsaharienne. Également, il y aura dans les prochains mois, Inch'Allah, des zones spécifiques spéciales au niveau des postes frontaliers, aussi bien à l'est, à l'ouest et au sud. Aussi bien, il y a des projets concernant les lignes maritimes et les lignes routières. Tout ça s'implique et s'imbrique sur des politiques nationales visant à promouvoir beaucoup plus la production nationale, transformer aussi bien la matière première que les demi-produits en Algérie, et tout ça dans un cadre inclusif et de collaboration avec les pays partenaires. Voilà, madame.
Thank you very much for that. And Mr. Bublenza, I'd like to come to you now. From the perspective of a business leader, what are the practical steps you'd like to see, whether from policymakers, financiers, or trade partners, to make Africa more competitive globally? Over to you.
Bonjour et merci pour l'invitation. Tout d'abord, avant de répondre à votre question, je dois donner un aperçu sur la société Bublenza. Qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Bublenza Company is a family company. We are based in the west of Algeria and we are producers of carob powder and carob derivatives. What is carob powder is now used. We know that Africa is very strong in the cocoa business and the coffee business. I can tell you that we can be also stronger in the carob business and dates business. What we are doing right now, the prices now of the cocoa increase a lot, and the only substitute of the cocoa is the carob, C-A-R-O-B. Today, the carob is used as cocoa replacer. We start this business since 1994. We are in the fourth generation of exporters. Today, our company exports more than 50 countries worldwide. We are exporting to Asia, in Europe, America, South America, but our turnover in Africa is very low. We are exporting in Nigeria and Ghana only. Our turnover in Africa is around 0.6% of our turnover, which is nothing. Why this situation? We have seen that in the beginning, Mr. told that we have two major problems. We have the logistic, which is the main problem in Africa, and also the financial system. I think that we need to promote, because Africa is the future, and Africa is exporting, main of the export of Africa is raw material. In our company, we decide to move, and we create our R&D department. And with our R&D department, we create a new product with high added value. We start with the first transformation, and we in the carob pots, we have the pulp and the seeds. We started by exporting the pulp and the seeds, and after we decided to move and to valorize the pulp. And we produce the carob powder, And now, from the carob powder, we are producing the carob extract, and we are working on food supplements and other high added value products. I can give you an example. When you export an orange, you export it at 0.5 centimes US dollar per kilo. When you export concentrate of orange, is around 3-4 euros per kilos. But when you export a vitamin C, is high added value, and you are exporting science, you are exporting value, and you are creating a workforce in Africa. Today, we need to push all our states to support the R&D departments, to support implementation of African companies in Africa, to find ways to help the African company to move very fast. We have experience how to move in the industrial issue in the carob, but we can move in dates and different concentrate fruits. And I can tell you that African companies, they have good experience. We have young population, and our force, job force is young, and we can move very fast. And
Thank you so much for giving that perspective as a business leader. And you did point out some of the challenges that you have faced trading within the African continent, and we will tap a little bit more into that. But before I do that, I would like to invite onto the stage to join our panel Zanele Sani, Chief Director, Export Promotion and Marketing. She is representing from South Africa, Honorable Kenneth Morolong, Deputy Minister in the Presidency and a Member of Parliament. Welcome. A round of applause for her as she joins us. Thank you so much. Mr. Boublenza, I would just like to ask you this again, like, what would you like to see happen now with the AfCFTA? So, you know, you have a successful business, you're able to trade with other African businesses. What would you like to see happen in the short term as a result of the AfCFTA, and how will this make your business better?
I think that for the African companies, I think the first step is to create a good network, African good network, by promotion the African countries or Africa destination. I think this is the first step. The second step is to organize fairs and exhibitions like you are organizing as IATF. And making a lot of promotion of this kind of exhibitions to promote and to develop this networking. The third point, I think, is to resolve the logistic system that today we are exporting in Nigeria, and when we ship our containers to Apapa, the transit time is around 90 days. Which is not economic. I think the logistic problem needs to be resolved soon as possible. And as facilitations, I think that the customs need to help African countries to exchange between them by giving them facilities because we had big problems in Apapa to clear the containers, and I think we need to have a special way for African exports in different port and airport. This is my point of view.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. So I think a few of us here have pointed out some of the challenges, but that also brings home how much potential there is if we can remove these barriers. And of course, one of the biggest ways that Africa can trade that is its trade story, can change its trade story. It's by moving beyond raw exports, as you've pointed out, into value addition. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit more and bring in Engineer Adib. Say within the next 3 to 5 years, what low-hanging fruit in beneficiation can be seized to rapidly scale value addition?
Thank you, Didi. First of all, I'm delighted to be a part of this very distinguished panel, and I'm delighted to participate. I've only became CEO of ITFC a few months ago, and I've visited Algeria twice. So I'd like to also commend the Algerian government for doing a great job in organizing and their hospitality of this very important event. As you know, for any commodity or any good or any service, supply and demand are going to be equal. And if you look in terms of supply, the African continent has no shortage of abundant supply of commodities in the raw fashion. So you talk about cotton, you talk about cocoa, as we've heard, from feedstock, energy feedstock, to livestock, critical minerals, to precious stones. There's abundance, actually. It's just a fantastic abundance. And if you look at the demand side of the equation, it's as you'd expect, equally fantastic. And usually at the supply-demand curves, what you get is a market price under normal conditions, stable conditions. And here's the problem that I'd like to identify. This market price, if you look at it, it's set by the market under, as I said, stable conditions, equilibrium conditions. But how much of that value is captured within the African continent is the big question. Again, I believe my fellow speakers spoke about, my fellow panelists spoke about cocoa and maybe looking at alternatives to cocoa. I've looked at the numbers and they're just staggering. 75%, almost 75%, 3/4 of global supply of cocoa emanate in Africa. How much does Africa capture of the market share of chocolate? 5%. So the mismatch is clear for everyone to see. And this means forfeiting the revenues that are associated with going down that value chain. Maybe anecdotally, I was invited to a chocolate museum in one of the European countries I visited recently. And you can see, so the value chain doesn't even end at the supermarket shelf. They've made the full industry of it. Cross-selling and going down the value chain. And then you pay tickets to go to the chocolate museum. And then at the exit of the chocolate museum, you think you're going out to the street, they say, no, that's the chocolate gift shop. So you go and buy a cornucopia of different types of chocolate. Does it end there? No. Then you go to the chocolate cafeteria and you're served chocolate cake and brownies, and then you swallow it down with hot chocolate. And then the question is, how can we enable our member countries, in the case of ITFC, to capture more of that value chain? Because this is where all the difference happens. The idea is, in the case of chocolate at least, you go into the processing, into the packaging, into the sales, and into the financing. And then you embed yourself into the global supply chain. And it's unrealistic to expect, again, in the case of chocolate, or in the case of oil, or in the case of any of these commodities, to capture the full chain. But if you look at the 3%, I think maybe you or even other panelists and other speakers have spoke about Africa's share in the global trade. It just does not reflect the abundance that we talked about. Maybe very quickly, I'll turn into what we're doing in ITFC in order to help our member countries tackle this problem. Because we believe that if you want sustainable economic and trade growth, the way to tackle it is to embed yourself in the value creation, addition, and capturing chain. So maybe I have a list that I'll go to very quickly. One is the West African Cotton Program. We've been working with farmers and engineers in Africa in order to improve their crop yield and also to make them export ready. Another example is agri-food, where we've financed the value chain in sugar and rice. So we have been targeting in our financing of our clients that value chain, rather than just exporting the raw materials. And finally, we have a program called AATB, and I hope some of you will get to visit us. I think it's in one of the pavilions. I passed by quickly this morning. AATB is the Arab-Africa Trade Bridges Program. And we have partners that work with us in that program. I will mention, I hope I don't forget anyone, but Afrexim Bank, definitely, Badia, the OPEC Fund, as well as different entities within the Islamic Development Bank, and we're one of these entities. So the AATB has been working in countries in West Africa. The list here includes Benin, Cameroon, and Togo. And what we have been doing is giving SMEs access to global information, trade information, databases and platforms. So they're not confined to the immediate local markets that they face day in, day out, but they can target the finished good markets. So we're working on all of the above, and as usual, it's all of them.
Excellent. Thank you for telling us the work that the ITFC is doing in this area of value addition. And you mentioned access to trade information, which I know is something that you also earlier mentioned, Dr. Cook-Hamilton. I know that this is an area that you do a lot of work in as well, in the area of value addition. So same question really for you. Within the next 3 to 5 years, where can Africa quickly add value, move away from exporting raw materials, and where are the quick wins? And tell us the work that you're doing in this area.
Thanks. It's working? Yeah? Okay. Thank you so much. I think we do work with ITFC. We're very happy with our collaboration, and we'd, of course, like to strengthen it. We did a value chain analysis study for Africa on behalf of the AU and also the AfCFTA. And this was done, it was launched at the heads meeting in Niamey in 2022 or 2023. We started with 400 value chains that could possibly be, have good resonance and growth. And we narrowed it down to 4 main ones. And those 4 main ones were pharmaceuticals, automotives, cotton, apparel, and what they call formulated complementary foods or infant food. So essentially the pre-prepared foods that infants eat. And what was amazing is that once we were able to drill down, it was so clear what the opportunities were in these 4 sectors if integration really took place and if the kind of value addition and regional value chain arrangement could be accomplished. What was critical, though, was to recognize the numbers. There are 20 billion in terms of export potential, 22 billion export potential for automotives. Now, South Africa, as you know, is the biggest automotive exporter. But though they export, I think 60% of their exports they are responsible for 60% of AGOA, mainly through automotives. If they are able to remove the dependence on that, which may occur sooner than we think, there will, I'm sorry, I had to kind of throw that in there, but there will be the opportunity, if they look at the UAE and China, to have over $1 billion in terms of alternative export markets for the same products. The second issue is that the assembly of EVs, electric vehicles, it's great, except that we import the batteries. Why? Africa has the single largest supply of critical minerals that go into making batteries in the world. How does that make sense? As my young Gen Z people would say, make it make sense, Mom, make it make sense. So how do we do that? And this is a critical other. And so what we're doing now is drilling down to the EV value chain market and looking at how we can help the countries that are able to do this actually begin a battery production value chain that actually begins to feed into the actual making of the cars. On pharmaceuticals, right now, Africa imports 20 billion, I think, worth of pharmaceuticals. It is going to increase in the next 4 to 5 years by 73%. This is a wide open area. And this is why, of course, there's ARSO and other organizations that are now working in Senegal, Nigeria, and so on, to begin to produce the R&D, to invest in the infrastructure required to make pharma work on the continent. There's no need after COVID to be begging people for vaccines. It ought not to happen. And I hope that it doesn't happen again. The third one I wanted to just mention was the cotton value chain. On the cotton, Africa has a $1.2 billion surplus for raw cotton. Isn't that fantastic? But we have a $4.16 billion deficit for cotton apparel. So we export, I keep saying we, I'm not African, but I am. But there's a 1.26 export, great. But then we have a 3 billion deficit because we import 4.16 billion, sorry, we have a 4.16 billion deficit, which means we import 5-point-something billion in apparel made from cotton. Why? No value addition, no processing beyond primary products. The vast majority of LDCs are in Africa. The vast majority of commodity-dependent developing countries. Why? Because there is no value addition, and we have to, that's what the AfCFTA will do. At least that's my hope. And then the last one is the numbers for the infant food. We export 379 million in formulated complementary foods. We import 1.3 billion. That's a $1 billion deficit for food. This is Africa. Food is not the issue. The production of food is not the issue. So the investment in building the infrastructure is critical. The investment in R&D is critical. The incentivization of the universities and the other systems to actually make it something that young people also want to get involved in. The pharma and automotive are off the charts. They can be a game changer. And so I'll stop there. But, you know, as you can see, I'm very impassioned about this. It doesn't make sense. And so...
Thank you so much for pointing out. I like how you call it game changers. Pharma, automotive, cotton, and pre-prepared foods. You made a comment there on South Africa's automotive industry, and you were laughing, Zanele. So I want to bring you in here. Because at the end of the day, it's all about having the right incentives. It's about having infrastructure in place in order to scale this, as we said, and there is certainly still a big gap. So let's bring you in here. Do you think African governments are putting the right incentives and infrastructure in place to actually scale this? We can't just keep talking about it. We have to see it get done, right? So over to you.
Thank you very much. I really couldn't agree more with the panelists that have spoken to me prior to me, and apologies for coming in late. I think in terms of what the governments are doing, we are doing something, but it's not enough in terms of the demand. I think if I can use South Africa as an example, in terms of supporting exporters, we have what is called the exporting, marketing, and investment assistance. And that really helps us to support SMMEs to look for new markets in terms of diversification efforts. but the demand that we have always outstrips supply because of the limited coffers that we have. But I think where we could do more as governments, and I believe that other governments are also doing the same, most of the exhibitors that are here, if you go to the country stands, to some extent have been supported by the incentives that the governments are providing to them. Where I really think we should do more, because in terms of market diversification, we bring the exporters to these markets, but where we should really think more creatively is when they do find buyers, they meet with buyers, now the challenge becomes the compliance to the technical regulations, to the standards of the different countries. So you'll find that someone has got a product that's approved, that the standards and the technical regulations are met in South Africa. Now they need to enter Algeria. They now have to go into the process of complying to the standards, or if it's a pharmaceutical product specifically, you then have to go through the regulations, the testing, where a product has been proved to be viable, but the costs that go into placing that product on the shelf are exorbitant. So you almost want to, all of us governments to focus on, at a government to government, recognizing each other's standards, so the mutual.
So that was day 2 of the Intra-African Trade Fair that we're watching, where policymakers, investors, business leaders, all of them gather to map out the strategies for Africa's economic transformation under the AfCFTA. And the event continues through the 10th of September with more discussions and more deals aimed at unlocking the continent's full trade potential. And you have been watching Newsday with me, Adeniyi'S. Goodbye, and thank you all for watching.